Please welcome Dr. Saurland from Purdue University, Fort Wayne. Thank you.
Find everybody to be courageous and interrupt me because if I can't succeed,
I have an extra word.
I'm really excited to share this time with you all. My research looks at the experiences and perspectives of transgender and genderqueer singers. And so today, I'm going to speak with you about gender-expansive pedagogy in forms of teaching. And as your wonderful teacher introduced me, thank you, Dr. Hams. My name is Saurland. My pronouns are he, him, his, and they, and their. And I'm the director of choral studies at Purdue University, Fort Wayne. And I just start with some quick session norms. I aim to make this a brave and safe space that I invite you to practice empathetic listening. Conversations around gender and equity and diversity can cause folks some discomfort, so I invite you to sort of lean into that. I feel like some of our best learning actually happens when we have to sort of lean into discomfort. I'm a researcher. I'm also a gay and genderqueer person, so I recognize that I have my own lens. I have a perspective in this which makes me biased. And that in speaking about gender, and there are questions, I embrace us all to have clumsy conversations, to use the language that we have at this time, and to recognize that when talking about gender and gender identity, language is evolving. And so what I understand to be the best language might be different in another space or for other people. What this is about fostering dialogue. And so this is about compassion, empathy, acceptance, belonging, and an ethics of teaching. And what this is not about is about politics with a capital P, divisive concepts, wokeness, censorship, or coercion. And today I'm going to talk about gender as a cultural construct, pedagogical language, concept of words, specifically regarding repertoire and attire, vocal technique of transgender singers, policies and advocacy, and then I hope that we have time for questions. And I also want to just acknowledge that I know this is a NAfME group, and so there are probably singers and instrumentalists involved, and as a choir director and a voice teacher, a lot of this is geared more towards the vocal side, but I'm hoping that our instrumental colleagues will be able to bring their knowledge to this subject matter as well. I will start with this notion of gender as a cultural construct. So we begin by thinking about that sex and gender are separate ideas. So sex, regarding a noun of sex, is really based upon three tangible aspects of the body. So that would be hormones, anatomy, and chromosomes. That's what makes up a person's biological sex. Hormones, anatomy, and chromosomes. Most of the time, in utero or at the time of birth.
Here we go.
Intrauterine is a child has the presence that I'm going to use some anatomy language. If the baby has the presence of penis, they are deemed masculine. And if they do not have male genitalia, they are deemed feminine or female. Oftentimes, hormones and chromosomes, those as part of sex characteristics, are not evaluated for children. Now, what does this have to do with the way we live our lives? Well, in many cases, if a child is assigned male at birth, they are often taught that they should wear colors like blue and green. They should enjoy activities like football, robots, G.I. Joe, things that we typically associate with the masculine stereotypes. Whereas babies that are assigned female at birth often expected to like pink and purple, to like notions of ballet or teddy bears, or to, be responsible for cooking and cleaning and sewing. These sort of stereotypes
gendered part of a person's identity, right? So sex is these tangible aspects of our body: chromosomes, hormones, anatomy. And based on that biological sex, often a child is reared to expect to like specific things and expect to live their lives in a specific way. If a person is assigned masculine at birth, and they like these sort of stereotypical masculine things, and they see themselves as being masculine, their gender is cisgender. Similarly, if a person is assigned female at birth, and they believe that they are, and they see themselves as being feminine in the world, then they are a cisgender woman. If a person is assigned male or female at birth, or, important to note, if they are assigned intersex, meaning their genitalia does not align with either the profile of a penis or a vagina, this means that they may not identify as cisgender. It may mean that they are transgender or genderqueer. And gender also impacts music. If you look at the book that's sort of peach-colored, you will see that the title is Roses, Laughter, and Lullabies. And those songs are what have been chosen for mezzo-sopranos. Now, I don't know if I can hear any of you, but does anyone want to take a sort of stab or a guess at what you think the curriculum, the hidden curriculum or meaning behind songs are that are about roses, laughter, and lullabies? What do those songs teach young women about the kind of music that they should be singing?
Before they answer that, Dr. Saurland, do you mind if I hit record?
No, not at all.
Just want to make sure. Okay.
Does anyone want to take a guess as to what the sort of hidden curriculum or
recording in progress
that might be? Shout it out if you've got a hand up.
teaching families that they need to mothers.
Yes, absolutely. Good. Any other thoughts?
Kind of just teaching that young women should sing more delicately and kind of like la-di-da-di-da instead of more powerfully, I guess.
Absolutely. Those are amazing responses, both of you. Thank you so much. If we look at the bluish-greenish book, you'll see that specifically is listed as songs for young men. And here, the songs are about young ladies, shipmates, and journeys. Does anyone want to take a gander as to what they think the hidden curriculum is in that repertoire?
It's kind of like,
Yes, I see a hand.
it's kind of like pushing towards that, like, you know, someone who's more masculine should recognize ladies and be a breadwinner on a ship somewhere and go to school and be out doing stuff instead of at home.
Yeah, greater independency, right? And I think if I heard you correctly, you mentioned the fact that they can sing about young ladies. We might even wonder if we recognize that telling young men that they can sing about young ladies means that they're allowed to romanticize them, that they're allowed to sort of sexualize them even at a young age. We see gender pop up in music not just in the text of songs, but we often see it in the assignment of musical instruments. Now, this may or may not be the case where you grew up, but for a long time, and in many parts of the United States, it's often been that young women are expected to play instruments like flute or clarinet, whereas young men are expected to play trumpet, drums, saxophones. Raise your hand if that sort of aligns with maybe sort of stereotypes that you've seen around instrument assignments. Right, so we do have some shared experience in that. We recognize that the instruments that were more stereotypically part of military bands, brass instruments, trumpets, and so on and so forth, have been sort of stereotypically more associated with males, whereas these lighter instruments, the higher pitched instruments, flute, clarinet, have been more typically assigned to women. So this sort of opening conversation is just to kind of make us help us start to think about how gender does impact music and music education. And then, of course, if we're going to think about what are the implications of those stereotypes for students that are transgender, genderqueer, non-binary, gender non-conforming, is that maybe we need to open up our expectations as to what we expect of those students. And I would proffer what we expect of all students. This slide is up here to remind us that gender expansive language is constantly emerging. So we may have students that identify as trans, we may have students that identify as genderqueer, and those definitions might be different. And so we as music educators and as pre-service music educators take on the onus of making sure that we are up to date in what our most modern gender expansive language is, and making sure that we're providing space for our students to be out and to be open with their identities with us. If you're not familiar with the gender unicorn, it's my delight to introduce you to this really fun infographic. The gender unicorn helps us understand the difference between gender identity. So that is the way the person sees themselves, right? The way they move about the world and the way they see themselves within the world. I often will describe gender identity as a person's inner compass, the way they see themselves as perhaps being female, woman, girl, or being male, man, boy, or being some gender that lives between masculine, feminine, or outside those paradigms at all. Gender expression is different from gender identity, right? So a person may see themselves in a way differently than they express themselves outwardly. Gender expression has to do with the clothing, the hairstyle, the way they sort of shape their bodies to be seen in the world. So most of the time, I wear a suit, maybe I wear a tie, typical masculine clothing. But my gender identity is much closer to being genderqueer, meaning I don't see myself as being as masculine as, and I know I don't look all that masculine, I don't act all that masculine, but even more so people still read me most of the time as masculine rather than genderqueer. I could change my gender expression. I could wear makeup, I could paint my fingernails, I could do other things if I wanted, if that felt important to me. I just don't. And so it's important for us to recognize the difference between the way one sees themselves in the world and the way they express that outwardly. Further, oftentimes someone's sexual orientation or sexuality, and I'm skipping down to the physically attracted to or the emotionally attracted to, sometimes is conflated with gender. So if we see somebody who appears to us as being masculine, but they have feminine traits, people will often assume that they're gay. But instead we need to recognize that the way they behave in the world, the way they carry themselves in the world, is actually more related to their gender expression than to who they are physically or emotionally attracted to. And then, of course, the sex assigned at birth brings us back to that very early slide where I said sex is not gender, where we recognize that our chromosomes, our hormones, and our genitalia do not necessarily indicate what our gender identity and gender expression should be. Before we move on, I know that's a lot of gender theory that I've just thrown at you, but I also recognize that young people tend to know a lot more about gender and sex identity than older folks do. So do you have any questions before we sort of move on and talk about the implications more in music education? Yeah, go ahead. I see at least one hand.
Hi, so I'm cisgender, and I have been working a lot in recent years to become less ignorant. My best friend is a trans woman, so I've learned a lot from them. But one thing you said near the beginning when we were talking about assigned at birth and like the things that we were expected of is, for example, if I was born male, you specifically mentioned like if they sort of liked these things or if they just kind of felt masculine, that's like that. I would be considered cisgender for that. But I mean, you can be considered, or like, isn't the case that when you're born, it's not necessarily you can feel masculine. Like I could identify as a woman, but want to present and like dress more masculine. Is that like that is the case, right?
Yes, that's exactly right. And your comment's been very helpful because it's reminded me that gender identity, gender expression, and the ways that we identify our gender is from ourselves, from inward to outward, where we don't assign these labels or we don't label somebody else's as being transgender or being masculine or being feminine, that these are labels that we take on ourselves. So there may be somebody who, let's take for example, was assigned female at birth, and maybe they dress in masculine clothing, whatever that means, and maybe they behave in ways that's more stereotypically masculine. Well, they aren't transgender unless they themselves identify as transgender. So I think I'm so grateful for your comment because it reminds me that these are labels that we take on ourselves, not labels that we apply to other people. That's awesome. So I recognize that the screen that I'm sharing with you is relatively older data. This is actually back from 2021. So this data is 4 years old. But I just wanted to situate this talk within the state that you are currently in. And you'll see this is data collected by an organization known as GLSEN. And typically they do a study every other year, so every 2 years, about the climate of public schools in every state with regards to the inclusion or the safety that LGBTQ students feel in public schools. So this is very sobering information. Even though it's 4 years old, I doubt it's probably changed that much. And 99% of students who identify as LGBTQ plus in Oklahoma schools, 99% of them continue to hear the word gay as a negative way, right? So this very homophobic way of speaking, of referring to something as being gay in a negative way is still very prevalent. 98% of students hear no homo. 94 hear other homophobic remarks. 94% hear negative remarks about gender expression. And then 90%, which is still really quite high, but it does feel lower than the others, hear negative remarks about transgender people. And I know that you are all well-informed people, and to know that there has been more anti-trans legislation at both the local and state levels than we've ever seen before in the last couple of years. So as educators, we have to be cognizant that essentially transphobia and basically hatred toward the LGBTQ plus community is rampant at a level that is essentially unprecedented, and that is going to make your future LGBTQ students feel very unsafe, and they'll have difficulties, perhaps, really fully committing to school if they don't feel like they are safe in the school building. And it only seems to be getting worse under the current national administration, federal administration. So I think we as teachers need to do everything we can to make sure that students feel safe in the environment that we are in charge of, which is our classroom.
Dr.
Dr. Saurland?
Yes.
On my message, and due to the issues with getting the room going, and I apologize for that, we do have to wrap it up by 6. So I just wanted to pop that in so you saw that.
What I'll probably do then, Dr. Kams, is I will send you this PowerPoint so you can share it with other folks. If we don't get through everything and people want to read through, it's also got my contact so people could contact me.
I
Thank you. I apologize for the trouble.
No worries.
Thank you.
All right, so language, concerts, vocal technique, and then advocacy. So I hope many of these bullet points sort of validate things that you already know, and these might just be helpful reminders. But when it's legally possible, and that's not the case in every state right now, use a student's chosen name and pronouns. Note that I've used the word chosen name and pronouns and not preferred name and pronouns, right? And this, I think, is something that we can have for all students, right? Growing up, my legal name is William. I prefer Billy amongst my friends and colleagues. So this is the case for everybody. It shouldn't be illegal, but many states are trying to outlaw this sort of practice for trans folks. So while you are still legally able to do it, make sure you use your trans students' chosen names and pronouns. Do your best to normalize giving your pronouns so that other students may feel safe to share theirs with you. You may use this in PowerPoint, you may use this in email signature, you may put this on syllabi, you may give this on various documents that you share, but normalizing that you give your name and your pronouns is a wonderful signal for other folks to feel like they can do the same. If you don't know somebody's pronouns, using they, them, their is a great way to avoid misgendering them as either masculine or feminine, in case you don't know. In the world of choral music, use voice part names like soprano, alto, instead of other gendered words. Growing up in Ohio as an alto, I was constantly asked to sing, even though the choir director would say, okay, I need all the ladies to sing, or I need all the women to sing. So just be careful that when you're referring to a group of people, you're doing your best to use gender neutral language. This might be avoiding using words like men and women, or ladies and gentlemen, or guys as a catch-all. Find other ways to address groups of people. And find something that's authentic to you. I often, because I've been doing this for so long, I call most of my students, like groups of students, beautiful people. I had a teacher that called everybody peeps. You could call your students musicians or scholars or learners, but just finding little ways of avoiding gendering groups of people and misgendering students. And in some cases, you may want to reconsider ensemble names. So if you have like a men's choir, might it be better if you labeled it as a tenor bass choir? Or if you have a women's choir, might it be better to refer to it as a treble choir, or something that doesn't even indicate the voice part at all? When I came to Purdue, Fort Wayne, I was really delighted to find out that the treble choir is just called the Chamber Treble Singers. And so there's really nothing inherently gendered about it. But if it had been the women's chorale, I would have gone about to make sure that that language is more inclusive in case you have trans men that sing soprano, or you have countertenors in that ensemble. So just sort of checking around to make sure that you're using gender neutral language as much as possible. This might seem standard, but making sure that you don't have misogynistic, sexist, and gender oppressive repertoire. For example, I would suggest never doing the song "Bought Me a Cat" by Aaron Copland. The last verse is about buying a woman and having ownership over a woman. Choral music has been around for a long time, and there's a lot of songs that are racist and a lot of songs that are sexist. So making sure that you're just avoiding the stereotypes that fall within certain repertoire. I think a concert black outfit is a great way to go, rather than shoving people into a dress or tuxedo. It sort of fits the bill for everybody while your choir still looks good. Finding songs that perhaps represent trans composers. I'll give you a couple examples. One thing that's pretty standard where I live is choir directors like to list their students by the voice part they sing in choir, so listing all the sopranos and altos in a concert program. That can be problematic if you say you have a trans woman that sings bass she may not want her name listed in the bass section, so I just suggest listing all singers alphabetically. There's no need for the audience to know who an alto is versus who a soprano is. And if you have somebody whose voice maybe doesn't fit within a standard voice type of either, say, alto or tenor, this idea of creating a hybrid part where maybe sometimes a person sings the alto part and sometimes they sing the tenor part, finding a place for them in the choir so that their voice resonates the best is something to consider, especially for voices in transition. Since I'm going to share this PowerPoint with your teacher, I won't go over everything that I have in my Concert Black, but it's not a free-for-all is my point. It's a sort of very sort of set of regulations to follow, so it's not like they can just wear anything that's black, and that's what ensures that everybody looks good on stage while still feeling comfortable in the clothes that they have chosen for themselves. I'll give you a couple examples of gender oppression in music. Maybe you don't know the song Walking on the Green Grass. It's a really jaunty piece. I like it musically quite a bit. But the first verse goes, here's the text. Walking on the green grass, walking side by side, walking with a handsome beau, I shall be his bride. And it's about the man sort of owning and taking ownership over his soon-to-be wife, and the woman giving up her independence to be his wife. Again, it's a jaunty song, it's really fun, but with the millions of choral pieces that we have in the world, I'm just going to encourage each one of you to really think about what is the hidden curriculum in the repertoire that we select. Another example, and I'm calling myself in on this, when I was an elementary teacher, in October I love to do a game based on the early nursery rhyme, Peter, Peter, Pumpkin Eater, had a wife and couldn't keep her, put her in a pumpkin shell, and there he kept her very well. And then the game went on and said all day long, with nothing else to do, she practiced saying rhythms, how about you? And it was a great game for me to assess whether my second graders could read quarter notes and eighth notes. But the problem is the hidden curriculum there is that it's okay for this random Peter guy to shove his wife in a pumpkin and force her to stay there. It's sort of this sort of hidden curriculum that we saw in that book that said young ladies, journeys, and shipmates, right? That men are sort of allowed to travel and have independency and women are not. So just look for those things in your lesson plans because they pop up. If you don't know the music of Maria Isabel Valverde, I really encourage you to look into her music. She's an extraordinary composer and a trans composer at that and writes some incredible social justice repertoire. Another friend of mine is Michael Busowitz-Quarm, another trans composer who writes a lot of music, not necessarily about being trans, but writes a lot of music that is A, just amazing, and B, often on a subject that has to do with some sort of social injustice. I absolutely do not program music by trans composers just because they're trans composers. I program music because it's good. But I like to make sure that any concert program or out the course of the year, I'm making sure that my music is not mostly just music by white men, for which, as you probably would all recognize, it sort of dominates the composers in the world of choral music. I'm skipping ahead just so we get through more things. Most of my research is about the vocal technique of trans singers. So a trans masculine person may take testosterone. This will, if they're an adult, this will make their vocal folds thicken, but it won't necessarily make their vocal folds lengthen because the larynx is made of cartilage, and cartilage doesn't get bigger as we get older. But they can still, if they take testosterone, find a lower vocal range. But like any person who's going through a voice change, there may be 6 to 12 months or so where the voice doesn't feel settled. It doesn't feel like it's fully capable. They may experience hoarseness or breathiness or even some early fatigue. just after they've started taking testosterone. And there's a lot of variables on this. It really depends on how old they are, sort of their overall body makeup, and the strength of the testosterone they've been put on, dosage, size. But there is a world for them to sing as a tenor, bass, baritone, if that's what they want. And you can help them by giving them exercises that help bring the vocal folds together with good breath support. Things like semi-occluded vocal tract exercises like THVZ. Some of them may, if they were a former soprano or mezzo, discover that they sing with a higher laryngeal position. So using an ooh vowel can help lower the larynx. Finding a longer vocal tract. And some transmasculine folks might also bind their chest to minimize chest size. And so while we would never talk to somebody about their undergarments, it's important for us to recognize that somebody may be wearing a binder. And so it may just be something that slightly impacts their breathing, depending on the kind of binder they're wearing. But just to recognize that with anybody, we need to make sure that we've got changing rooms and, places for folks to change into concert repertoire, that if they're wearing binding or something else, that they've got a place where they can feel comfortable to change in front of others, or not in front of others, I should say. A trans feminine singer may take estrogen because it will have impact in their body, but if they're an adult and their voice is already changed, it won't have an extreme impact on their range. They will experience some feeling of change because it changes the mucosal membrane on the vocal folds, but they're not going to wake up one day or 6 months later and suddenly be a mezzo soprano. But we can help them explore that upper registration by helping them explore what we would consider falsetto. I don't like the term falsetto, not because I don't think it's a good term, it's because it's a gendered term, right? So we often don't describe women having falsetto, so I wouldn't want to describe a trans woman as having falsetto, but we might describe that as being an upper registration. And that might be found through sighs or sirens. Similarly, like I said in the previous slide, semi-occluded exercises, things that get the breath moving, things that take a singer into their upper range. Recognizing that the E above middle C to the C above that is a good starting range. So when you're planning your vocal warm-ups, maybe think about where you're going to start them, not too low, not too high. But I think it's also important for us to recognize that if a trans woman sings in the tenor or bass range, we should recognize that as still being part of her feminine gender expression, even if we're accustomed to hearing that range as someone coming from a masculine person, right? So we just need to embrace there may be trans women that feel really good about being a bass in our choir. We just need to make sure that we're not misgendering her in that bass section. And if someone's been given hormone blockers before they start their puberty, like a young person who was assigned male at birth, that hormone blockers will actually stop the voice from changing, and they can in fact maintain their higher vocal range throughout the rest of their lives. There's a chapter in my book if you are more interested in trans feminine singing, but I'm going to skip ahead and talk briefly about non-binary singers. Often we know so little about what a person's desires are, how they identify if they're non-binary. So this is a great opportunity for us to just get to know our students and ask them, well, what are your pronouns? And if we're modeling our own pronouns, if we're sort of set up a classroom that they know they can be safe, it gives us a real opportunity to sort of get to know our students in this way. Many times they won't use any kind of hormone replacement therapy, testosterone or estrogen, but you never know. And so it's just a real opportunity to be student-centered, get to know them and help them in their vocal development, whatever that might be. I think it's important to note that since there is such a siege against trans folks, there is so much backlash against the trans community right now. It's important for us to be advocates for our students. As a person who is genderqueer, I am often exhausted in sort of advocating for me and for the rights of students. And so I think all of us have a place in this discussion, whether we're trans or whether we're cisgender, to speak up in our communities and speak out for our students. It doesn't mean we should speak over them, but sometimes a voice of authority is needed, right? That as a faculty member, you often have more power than your students when it comes to making changes in the policies of your schools. Recognizing that course rosters don't always reflect the names of students. So making sure that when you're like taking attendance on the first day of school, you're not just reading off the names, but finding a way to invite students to give you your name. So if they are a trans woman and they go by Susan, right? That may not be the name. That may not be their birth name, and that may not be the name that appears on your course roster. It's best not to say that name because you're going to out that student to everybody in the classroom and make them feel really discomforted. So I always give students a sort of info sheet where I ask them for their chosen name, their pronouns, and then I ask them lots of other questions. I ask them about their hobbies and I ask them about what kind of music they're interested in, and always an attempt to sort of learn as much about my students as possible. I would encourage you to spend more time if this is something that's important to you and you want to be a teacher who is LGBTQ affirming and inclusive. You will likely find ally training courses in your community. There are some that are online, so you may consider sort of looking for more resources online, but thinking through your community and who can you learn more about this subject from. And I offer myself, if this is something that you want to take more time to talk about and learn about, I'm happy to spend time with you talking through this subject matter. I share with you some non-discrimination policies that I encourage you to use in your own course documents. Like, for example, this appears in my course syllabus, and I make sure that I share it on the first day of every semester because I want to make sure that I uphold that everybody in my choir is responsible for being committed to practicing anti-harassment and non-discrimination of every member of the choir. Gender diversity, gender inclusivity can be discussed with children. I offer you a few books. It's a great way to sort of have conversations. And if you're curious, I have a lot of elementary and middle school music lessons that actually bring notions of gender diversity into the discussion. My own book on this subject is the one you see in the middle, Querying Vocal Pedagogy, but I also offer the Singing Teacher's Guide to Transgender Voices, and something that's more broad on music education is Matthew Garrett and Josh Palkey's book, Honoring Trans and Gender Expansive Students in Music Education. I know that was fast and furious. If you're curious in reading more about what I have written, these are my articles, and I have more things coming out about it. So some of these are short things that you might enjoy reading because they're really written with the practitioner in mind. Some of them are heavier and they're more research-based. And I know that we don't have time for questions, so I want to thank you so much for your time and attention. And again, I encourage you to reach out to me with any questions. I know that your amazing teacher, Dr. Cams, can reach me quickly. And so I also will say, Dr. Cams, you're welcome to share my cell phone number with your students if they are interested in texting me to set up an ongoing conversation.
I sincerely apologize for the troubles getting on as well. You're wonderful, and I appreciate you.
You're wonderful.
I appreciate you giving so willingly of your time on such an important and under researched topic. So,
of course.
Would you please give him your appreciation?